Keisha.
Hello.
How'd the rest of your week go?
It was okay. Nothing really different than the other weeks.
How'd the breathing homework go that I assigned? Were you able to practice the technique that we went over?
Yeah, I did do it. I think I did okay. I did feel less anxious, so I think it helped.
Okay, that's really good to hear. I'm glad it helped because it is a tool that we will continue to use. And so starting this session, I first just wanted to thank you for coming back in to have our second session. And as I discussed at the end of last session, prolonged exposure is a really common therapy used for clients who've experienced trauma. And I think it has the potential to be a really good fit for you. And it'll help to reduce some of those things that you're feeling and that you had explained to me in the last session.
Yeah, I know that you said that, and we talked about it and how it works for other people, and you explained why, but I don't know. It made me really scared to think about it.
And that's something to be expected in this process. It's normal for you to feel uncomfortable, and that's something we'll have to work through. And at some points it will feel scary, but we need to sort of bring up those feelings so we can ultimately work through them.
So we're going to talk more about that, right? Like how this will work and stuff and the process?
Yeah, absolutely. In this session, we'll spend some time going over how the in vivo exposure will work and how it'll be carried out. I do want to start off, though, by reviewing some of the things from our last session that I think are important to revisit. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great. So last session, we spent some time discussing your trauma and the feelings that you're experiencing, and you had mentioned a few different things that were really impacting and limiting you. Is it okay with you if we briefly discuss those specific things again? That way we can work together to create a plan for the exposure portion.
Yeah, we can talk more about them.
Thanks, Keisha. I really appreciate your willingness to open up and discuss these things, even though I know they can be painful to talk about.
I don't really like opening up about them. I really just try to avoid thinking about how I'm feeling. But that's hard when I feel like I just keep thinking about what happened over and over.
It sounds like you're thinking about the trauma and your experience quite frequently. I know you'd mentioned last session that after the event you feel as if you're more fearful around strangers. Is that still an accurate description?
Yeah, it is. I didn't used to be like that, but now I feel really anxious and scared around people that I don't know. It makes me feel so alone, like people don't get who I am or what I'm going through, and like that I just kind of want to be myself. I mean, I know I have my husband and my sister, and they're trying to help, but I feel so alone in my thoughts, and I feel like that adds to me being depressed.
And I want to take a second to recognize that alone feeling that you're discussing and the depression, and to point out that it's actually a common reaction and experience for other rape victims as well.
I mean, do other people feel, I guess, guilty? I think about it a lot, and what I should have done differently. Maybe if I'd done a certain thing, done it differently, it wouldn't have happened. These thoughts come to me a lot during the day.
Yeah, so shame and guilt are two very common feelings amongst other victims. And I know that you'd also brought up that you were having problems with your husband wanting to touch you. And this is another common symptom of rape victims after they've experienced the trauma.
Oh, I guess that kind of relieves me to know that I guess that it's normal.
Yeah, and the good news is that this type of therapy has helped others in the past to relieve some of those symptoms that you're experiencing.
I would really like that to happen. Does that happen by doing the exposure part?
So the exposure does definitely play a large part in this therapy, and it can be really beneficial to help you process your trauma and to help you in lessening the severity of your symptoms.
I mean, can you explain how that works? Like I said, I'm kind of scared.
Yeah, absolutely. So when a traumatic experience occurs, we develop this fear response tied to the experience, and that's actually stored in our memory. And because there's this fear response that's stored in your brain, the response can occur to things and situations that it wouldn't otherwise occur to. So we ultimately want to change our fear response so that heightened sense of anxiety and the other feelings you're experiencing can be reduced. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I think I'm following you.
Okay, good. So prolonged exposure helps by changing those fear responses that I talked about, and it does that by activating the fear structure and introducing new information.
So how does the exposure actually work?
So for this session, we'll be talking about the in vivo exposure, and that'll be something carried out by you in between sessions outside of our sessions. So these assignments will typically include you engaging in activities that have been feared since the trauma, but they're safe, such as interacting with strangers or maybe being home alone while you're listening to music.
Okay.
I can see that you're hesitant and that it does sound scary, but we will only be doing safe activities that you agree to. You are the one in control here.
Okay, that makes it sound a little better.
Good. And now switching gears a little bit, I want to do an activity with you that'll help us to determine some of those exposure activities that you will be doing. And so after our last session, I typed up some of the settings and activities that produced fear and gave you discomfort. So here's a copy of that sheet. And if you'll notice, there are ratings under each one. And we're going to go through each of the scenarios. And I want you to circle the rating that you feel applies. So you already have a pen. Do you have any questions so far?
No, I don't think so.
Great. And so this is on a 0 to 100 scale. So 0, you feel totally relaxed. 30, you would feel mild anxiety, but it wouldn't affect you when you're doing the activity. 50 would be moderate anxiety, and you would feel uncomfortable. 70 would be quite anxious and interfering with the activity that you're doing. And 100 would be the highest amount of distress that you've ever felt. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I can do that.
Okay, so why don't we start out with the first one? The activity would just be you listening to loud music when you're alone.
Okay, I think I could do that.
Okay, so what would you rate listening to loud music when you're alone?
Oh, I'd say maybe 30 to 40. It definitely makes me feel anxious, but I feel better when the door's locked.
Okay, and what would you rate it if the door was unlocked?
Oh, I would say 80. I don't feel comfortable at all when the door's unlocked, especially when I can't hear.
Okay, and I know you'd mentioned in the last session that you haven't been able to be home on Mondays since the event occurred. So moving on to the next line, what would you rate being home alone as on a Monday as?
90. I can't do that. It's unbearable.
Yeah, I can see why that one would be challenging for you. Let's move on to another one. What would you rate having your husband touch and hold your hand as?
I would say 70. I don't want him touching me at all.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. Looking at yourself in the mirror for 30 seconds. I know you'd mentioned some discomfort around looking at yourself.
Yeah, that's around a 50. It's hard to look at myself without feeling shame.
What about if we reduce that time to only, let's say, 5 seconds?
Like a glance?
Yeah, a glance.
I would say maybe 30. I still don't like to do it, but a glance is better than 30 whole seconds.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and now I want you to think about those tasks that we mentioned and try and think about one of the tasks that you think you could do on your own in one of the sessions that we would have you do the in vivo exposure.
It doesn't have to be one of the ones that really made me feel anxious, right?
No, it doesn't. We can start wherever you feel like would be a good starting point.
Okay, I mean, I think I could try to listen to music when I'm alone, maybe.
That sounds like a great starting point for the first session. How long are you thinking?
Maybe like 15 minutes. I feel like any longer and I would really start to get anxious.
Okay, and will anyone else be home when you're going to be doing this session?
No, it'll just be me.
Okay, Keisha, that sounds like a plan. Do you have a specific day in mind?
Probably on Wednesday. I know my husband will be home later that night.
Okay, great. So do you have any questions before we begin to wrap up?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, good. So in between our sessions, I would like you to do the exposure activity as homework and also try and utilize that breathing technique that we discussed last session. And I'll see you back here next week to discuss how things went.
Okay, that works for me.
Okay, I'll see you next week. Thanks, Keisha.
Thank you.